So I'm starting out by using pan pastels in the background to build up a nice soft dark colour. And if you don't know what pan pastels are, they're basically a soft pastel that has been compressed into a pan, and you apply them using soft tools. So that's SOFT. And I really love using these pans for so many reasons, but if you want to know more about them, I'll leave a link to a tutorial in the description below where I explain everything you need to know. When you first apply the pastel, it will look quite patchy, but if you keep applying it, it will become smoother as you add more layers. The paper that I'm working on is the Clairefontaine Pastel Mat, and this is the only paper that I like to work on with pastel. It's really quite different from any other pastel papers out there. I like starting with the background first because I can add the pastel right up to the edge of the outline and slightly over the outline of the lion itself, which means that when I go and do the lion, I can overlap that fur over the top of the background. And this will help stop that kind of halo effect that you get when you stop your background right where the edge of the lion starts. This will help create a more natural looking composition, and it will look like the subject actually belongs in that background. When it comes to the base layer of the lion itself, I also like to use pan pastel, but I'm going to add much less pastel than I did in the background. So I'm just going to add a really thin layer of pastel to the lion, and there will be quite a lot of paper showing through in this layer when I do this, and that's because I know that I'm going to be using pastel pencils on top of this. If you add too much pastel to the main subject in the first couple of layers, you won't be able to add that pastel pencil detail on top because you would have filled up that tooth of the paper too quickly. And what I mean by the tooth of the paper is that basically every paper you work on has these tiny little grooves or hills and valleys, which is known as the tooth. So when you come across with your pastel, it grips onto the top of the hills and then deposits the pigment into the valleys. And once your valleys are filled up with pastel, it becomes level with the hills, which creates kind of like a slippery surface, which your pastel won't be able to grip onto anymore. So just make sure that you're not adding too much pastel in the beginning layer. In my drawings, I tend to really hype up those colors, and I add a lot of colors that are not actually in the reference photo. And that's just personal preference, but I do recommend using more vibrant and saturated colors in your base layer anyway, even if you don't go as bright as what I do in my pieces. The reason that I tell you to use more bright colors in the base layer is because when you add more layers, you can add in those more natural kind of colors like the browns and that kind of thing to dull down the brightness of the base layer. But by having these bright colors that you've added underneath, it will actually show through in the end result and have a really nice sort of subtle brightness to it. If you have trouble trying to see some of these kind of brighter colors in your reference photo, something that I like to do is to edit my photo and really bring up the saturation level. So that way a lot of these colors just pop out from the reference photo and you can use those colors to add into your base layer. And this will just give you a much more interesting piece of artwork, and it actually looks a lot more natural this way as well, rather than just going straight in with browns and kind of muted colors. Once I've added all of my pan pastel, I'm going to blend this layer using some cotton tips. And there's a few reasons why I like to blend out my pan pastel layer. The main reason is to do with the tooth of the paper again. Blending the pastel actually pushes it into the tooth of the paper, which helps you be able to add more layers on top. It also helps with smoothing out some of these colors and kind of blending them in together a little bit more. It can also help with that excess dust as well, because you're pushing a lot of that powder into the tooth of the paper, so there's less floating around. Before moving on to the pastel pencils, if you'd like to improve your drawing and painting skills even further, then my Patreon channel is the solution for you. From as little as $4 per month, you will have access to every tutorial that I've previously uploaded on your chosen tier level in a variety of mediums like pastel, colored pencil, charcoal, watercolor, and more. There are tutorials available for a range of subjects like wildlife, birds, landscapes, still life, flowers, and portraits. If you would like to view the entire Patreon tutorial library before joining us, I'll also leave that link in the description for you as well. Not only are my tutorials full length, real time, and fully narrated with clear instructions and explanations, but you will also have access to the original reference photo, a traceable outline, and a list of suppliers including the exact color names I'm using, so you really can relax and follow along every step of the way. Every month, I upload brand new tutorials to the Patreon library, so you can grow and develop your drawing and painting skills and take your art to the next level. You can also join in on our members chat group where you can ask questions or advice, or share your artwork, and you can talk to other members in the Patreon community. And the best part is that there are no lock-in contracts, so you can upgrade or downgrade to a different tier level, or you can cancel your pledge at any time if Patreon isn't right for you. So why not give it a go? So I'm coming straight in with a light coloured pencil, and I believe this was either white or a really light kind of cream colour, but I'm actually using this to create texture over the entire lion, and then I will come back through and alter those colours slightly. So you don't want to use the exact same colour over the entire piece for all of the highlights, for example. You really want to have varied colours over the lion to make it look more realistic and natural and help with the contrast and shading as well. But if you add a layer of texture using that one light coloured pastel pencil like this, you can actually come back over the top with other colours to alter this colour. So I'm basically going to be glazing other colours over this to tint that white to be a slightly different colour. So if you've used oil paints or even acrylic or watercolour, you may be familiar with the term glazing, but it basically just means that we're going to lightly add colour to an area, which will tint that colour underneath to change it slightly. This way, I don't have to worry about changing my pastel pencil colour every couple of seconds to match what I see in the reference photo, because I can just alter the colour after I've done this layer. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to do it this way, so I don't have to worry about what colour I'm choosing throughout the entire process, and I can just focus on those kind of textures and details. And now I'm actually coming through with a really bright orange-yellow colour, and I'm tinting that colour underneath, and it will look quite bright at the moment, but once we've added a few more layers, the colour will actually start to calm down, and you'll see that it starts to look more natural. And I'm just going to keep switching my pastel pencil to lightly come over the top of that layer that we just did with the white pencil, depending on what I see in the reference photo. So the way that I choose my colours is by looking at my reference photo and picking out an area that looks really obvious to me. So there's these kind of really bright oranges at the top of the lion, and they were really standing out to me. So I chose that bright orange yellow to start with and added that in the area that I saw it in. And then I'm going to look at my reference photo and see if there's anywhere else that I can add that color while I've got it in my hand. And then I will move on to the next most obvious color to me. So I'm picking the slightly more muted kind of orange brown for the next color. And I'm doing the exact same thing. So I'm applying it to the area that I saw it in. And then I'm looking to see if there's anywhere else that I can apply that color. And then I'm moving on to a different color. So I'm basically going to do this until I'm happy with the layer. For those darker black areas, I'm actually coming through with a pastel stick because I find that these are a little bit darker than the pastel pencils. And I'm using a Rembrandt pastel stick for this, but a lot of soft pastel brands will do the exact same thing. They just tend to be a little bit softer, which means that they'll apply more pastel and it will be a lot more opaque than a pastel pencil. And because I want this piece to be quite a dark and deep color, I really want to have that extra dark shading on this piece. So I don't always use a black pastel stick, but it is a good idea if you want to get those really dark shadows and those really bright highlights to use that soft pastel stick. Then I'm coming through with my cotton tip again to blend this layer out, and this will help to soften it and get rid of some of the graininess. It will also help to blend the colours into each other a little bit more, and it also helps to dial down that colour a little bit as well. So some of those really vibrant colours that we've added will be a bit less vibrant now. Blending the layers out at this point will also help you be able to add more layers of pastel as well. Now that we're getting into the final layer, I'm being a bit more precise about where I'm adding my pastel pencil strokes. So I'm not going to be blending out this layer as much as I did in the previous layers. So a lot of these strokes will actually show through in the end result. So I want to make sure that they're all going in the right direction, that they're the right length, and that they're in the right spot. So this layer, I'm doing the same thing as I did in the previous layer, where I'm starting out with a lighter coloured pencil, and then I'm going to come through and glaze other colours over the top. So when you're drawing fur, you really want to make sure that your pencil strokes are not all the exact same as well. You want them going in the right direction, but you don't want them all to start and stop at the same point and have them all lining up in a row like a picket fence. It looks more natural if your strokes are a little bit more varied. So you can have some start and stop at different points, have some overlap each other, and have some slightly longer than others. So then I'm going to come through with those oranges and browns over the top of the light colour to tint those colours underneath. And then I'm going to come through with that black pastel stick to help darken up those dark areas. And this time I'm actually not going to use a cotton tip to blend out this layer. I'm actually going to just gently use my finger to blend it. So doing it this way means that it's not going to blend out your strokes entirely. Blending with your finger is a lot less harsh than blending with a cotton tip, and it will just soften the graininess a little bit without getting rid of your strokes completely. And we're getting towards the end of the piece, so I want my pencil strokes to show through to help with that fur texture, so I don't want to blend them out too much at this point. And now I'm going to add the finishing touches. So I'm going to come through with my white pencil and really hype up those highlights to make them stand out a little bit more, and then darken any areas that need to be a little bit darker, and just alter any colours that I think need to be changed a little bit. This tutorial was quite fast, but if you do want to see a real-time version of this tutorial, where I explain what I'm doing every step of the way, including the names of the colours and the supplies that I'm using, I have a link to my Patreon channel in the description below if you want to check it out. Otherwise, there's another tutorial in the top left-hand corner that I think you'll find useful, so click on that and I'll see you over there.